Hello, everyone. So we have Luis today with us, and we're gonna have some question from Luis about cybersecurity. So he's a IT security specialist, and he had like a more experience during the interview with cybersecurity jobs. So he's gonna share his experience, and then um, actually share some question related to cybersecurity. So let's talk about the cybersecurity and a question related to that. So I'm going to start with some terms that we have on cybersecurity. Let's talk about antivirus, EDR, and XDR. So what are the differences between these terms?
All right. So the antivirus versus EDR versus XDR is always an interesting conversation. Just because the antivirus, its main focus is just malware protection. This is the regular things that you have at your home computer at home. These are just the home stuff. It doesn't have as much features as EDR, for example, which is it's designed to for advanced threat protection.
Mhm,
Um, that's the elevation from AV, regular AV to the EDR. And then you get the XDR, which is the more unified solution, which have a little bit more threat detection and more response capabilities in it, and usually had more data across your devices or streams across your network. So in a commercial environment, you will see XDR quite a bit. There's also some overlap sometimes with EDR and XDR terms, but XDR is for extended detection and response. That's what it stands for. And then XDR is always the best thing that we have at the moment. There are other terms, but at work or previous works that I've been in, I've encountered different vendors for XDR, and they're usually great.
So which one has the AI technology, EDR or XDR?
It depends, but most of the time now they would put in the AI capabilities in the XDR because there's more features set on it. Yeah.
So, in terms of like firewall, because when we are talking about antivirus and endpoint protection, so then we have like IDS and IPS inside the firewall. So, what is the difference between IDS and IPS?
All right. So the IDS intrusion detection, it's designed basically to just alert you, right, of a potential incident. So
Hmm.
it's just telling you, it's just, hey, there's something wrong. Take a look at it. And the prevention system, not only that it would alert you, it can also prevent and take action. So that would be the most main difference between the two. And then you can configure it to do the actual actions such as blocking or you can even have it to tied into your other appliances to do certain stuff. But there's one that just alerts you, and there's one that's actually like prevents the threat from coming.
So, most of the next generation firewall currently they have IPS and IDS. Am I right?
Yes, correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
best of
So,
both worlds.
yeah. So then, like in terms of protection of the network, we have SIEM, XDR, and SOAR, right?
Yes, correct.
So what is the difference between SIEM and XDR? And I'll talk about a little about the SOARs.
Yeah, of course. So for the seam, it is right now. It's easy to make the distinction or mistake the distinction sometimes, but most of the seam, at least in the traditional seam, it's more like an log aggregation, right? So you actually get all the logs aggregated into this seam solution, and then right now there's even hybrid that are seam and XDR some type of thing. But in XDR, you're more likely just getting data so that you can respond to that threat and then be able to take action on it. As for the store, for the store, you would now be putting all your data collection sets together from your SIEM, from your XDR, from your firewall, and you can actually tie them together into that automation. And then you can take actions, take alerts, and be able to ingest data as well. And then take these actions, put them together, and create a really good workflow. So instead of doing things manually, if you have SOAR, which is very expensive, if you have the PanX SOAR, I'm not advertising, but it is actually quite a bit of money. But it is a really good feature set. It's for automation of your appliances.
Mm. So why the current trend of industry is SOAR, not SIEM? What do you think?
Because with the seam, it's only one component, right?
Hmm.
But with the SOAR, you still need to tie in more components into it to complete a better picture.
Hmm.
Seam doesn't have all the capability of an XDR, or the other way around. You have other tools that you'll be able to tie into SOAR, that which basically you cannot tie into seam. And the most important word of the SOAR is the orchestration, right? Being able to put things together, step one, step two, workflow type, and being able to execute that playbook, which most of, like, let's be honest, in the SIEM environment, they might not have as much playbook. Yeah.
Okay. So it brings more automation for like industry. Okay, great.
Right.
Um, so if someone asks you that, what is the simple way to secure a server? Well, how do you answer this question?
All right. So the first thing is password. For everyone, please make sure that you always change the default passwords. That's step one. When you're provisioning a system, always use a different password. And the second thing is, do not use the default user on the system,
Hmm.
right? So it's always best practice to create a new user and disable the default one, just to prevent automated tools from being able to log into your accounts. Also, try to prevent direct login of root accounts. If you can, use the elevation inside the system, and then make sure that you always have your appliances. If they don't need to be in the internet, don't put them on the internet. If they need to be the internet, then you at least needs to able to configure a firewall to only allow certain access from certain IP addresses or certain users or certain time even for some people. And also follow the least privilege policy. Do not try to put more than what you really need on the system, including its functions.
Okay, great. Um, so for example, for this simple server, someone asks you, okay, we should do a vulnerability assessment.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that what is vulnerability assessment actually?
So vulnerability assessment is basically finding flaws in the system. Most of these days now, you would use a tool, for example, Tenable, Nessus, to be able to look at certain weakness in those softwares or appliances, and it's mostly automated by using just a tool. This is just to find things, right? Like, you don't really need action them yet. That's for the reports. That's for the vulnerability scanning part. It's usually a list of a tool set or vulnerability or operating systems that you are targeting. And then usually there's a scope that you need to follow. Again, just to warn everybody out there, do not conduct vulnerability scannings on systems that you don't own or you don't have permissions to, and that is illegal. So
Yeah. So what is the difference between security assessment and pen testing?
okay, so for a vulnerability scan assessment, it's usually an automated scan just to identify the vulnerabilities in a specific subset of operating systems or softwares. And when the scan is being done, there's usually a scope as well, right? And again, I just want to remind everybody to make sure not run a vulnerability scan on systems that you don't own, only on the one that you have permission to and you're allowed to scan. The for the penetration test, it is usually a person that is actually just conducting this scope testing, attempting to be able to break into an environment. Sometimes that can come in from a white box penetration test where there is a specific set of privilege given to be able to test in the environment. The other thing is that the blockbacks penetration testing, where they would need to come from a outside perspective without a um, authenticated authentication mechanism. So they need to break their way in. This is just to discover some weaknesses in the system or even in the processes for the actual environment.
Okay, great. So there are some terms again, like HIDS and IDS. So I'm just asking the question to know that what is the difference between HIDS or NIDS?
All right. So for this one, it's a little bit more simple. For the HIDS is host-based intrusion. So this is just a single confined host. Usually you can find this sometimes as well together with your antivirus set or a specific software in your in your system that is only protecting that system. For NIDS, it is able to detect more intrusion on the network level. So it means more devices. So you have one HIDS confined in one host or only for that host. Then you get NIDS, which can cover and detect more intrusion on the system or sorry, network level, which means more hosts. So you get one per host, and then you get an IDS for all more hosts. Right? The main difference.
Yeah, so now let's talk about HTTPS and SSL and TLS.
Yeah.
So the first question is that how's the process of SSL encryption? So,
All right. So let's put this more on layman terms. All right. So um, your computer. So there is two components there. You have a computer, and let's say you have a server, right?
hmm
So first thing, the client, which is your computer, tries to initiate an SSL or TLS connection to a server, right?
hmm
So it goes to a server, and the server basically send an encrypted or public key certificate to say, hey, yeah, this is my thing. Please confirm that it matches yours. And when they're able to verify each other that they do trust both certificates, they're able to move back and start the secure process, and they can decrypt the data back and forth, and then now you're able to establish a secure connection between both.
So the certificate that we are receiving is generated by CA or signed by CA, right? Am I right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we are receiving that certificate, which is public key, and we also have the private key,
Private.
which is in the server, that web server.
Yeah.
Um, so how come that we don't have these days SSL? We have the term of TLS more, right?
Yeah.
Transport layer security. So what is the difference between TLS and SSL actually?
Yeah. So there's a couple of key differences, but mainly just to wrap it in a single statement is that the SSL is the obsolete version of TLS. TLS is the newer one and more secure, which is modern and was able to fix the vulnerabilities that was in SSL. However, because of the terms adoption, we still use the term SSL to describe the newer version of TLS just because it's a more common thing.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about cyber attacks. So do you know any, like, let's list some of the top 10 cyber attacks. Can you just list us some of them for us?
Sure, sure, yeah. So let me try. So let's we have malware. We also have denial of service, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also have distributed denial of service, where if you're using hundreds or thousands of computers or internet connected devices, you have phishing. That's very common. So if you're going to be working in your enterprise environment, you will be seeing a lot of phishing attempts for your company or organization. We also have spoofing. Spoofing can go different ways. Either it's spoofing of the email addresses or spoofing of your domains. That all can also happen. Identity-based attacks. That's also if you have somebody that is impersonating somebody, or they're able to gain access to an actual identity, name, address, username, password, and be able to be that person. That can also be done. Um, Code injection attacks. So if there is a vulnerability in the software, they're able to take advantage of that. We also have most common now is supply chain attacks. A good example is the 3CX VoIP company. If you need an example, they hacked. They were able to compromise a first company, and then that first company was somehow the software was distributed to 3CX. So now that second supply chain was now infected, and from that supply chain, they were able to compromise more people because there's people or organization using 3CX. There's other thing that is very known. It's insider threats, right? So, disgruntled employee, maybe they're pissed off with their boss, and then they started to put in some damage before they leave. Keep in mind when you're leaving your company, leave it in a really good will. Don't take anything. Don't destroy anything. Always make sure you're on good terms. And again, that is illegal when you do that. Insider threats can also come in financial um, situations where somebody was able to convince or bribe somebody to leak data. That's also one thing. We also have some kind of attacks as well. DNS tunneling. There's different kinds, but if you were able to penetrate the network, and then there's some appliances or measures in place, you could try to also uh, smuggle your data using DNS tunneling. Nowadays, we also have a lot of Internet of Things, like your camera, your webcam, baby monitors, anything that is connected to the internet. If they do have some kind of vulnerability in them, they will be compromised and they'll be able to use those to attack other devices. So make sure you secure those.
Okay. So you talk also about data exfiltration. So let's talk about What is that? Like, what is this term, data exfiltration?
All right. So that exfiltration is when you're lifting or taking information or data unauthorized or authorized even, but just improper handling, and then that data is now outside the company or the original location, right? So this is usually theft of data or data loss. That's also another term for that. And there's different kind of techniques that you can do it. So a really good example, I guess, if you get asked for this, is that exfiltration is still one of the most common threats out there. Um, so there's a couple of ways you can somebody can actually steal data, right? The first one is social engineering. So I maybe call Hamid, maybe he's working for BCIT, and I'll pretend, hey Hamid, this is a Lewis from BCIT IT system. We just want to double check if you have backed up the students' data properly. If you did, please send it to me because I need to make sure that we back those up on our off-site server. Please upload it to this link, right? And if Hamid, he's not gonna do it, but if Hamid somehow believe it was me and then I was authorized, maybe he'll do it. That's one thing. Second thing is outbound emails. So in enterprise organizations, this is really hard to prevent unless you have a specific tool because outbound emails are a regular part of the business. People can attach data on it, right? So somebody can export something, attach it as a file, and send it out to their personal email. There are some cases out there in real world. Number three, you can also have download to insecure devices, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, Lewis goes to a company and then he basically would put it in a USB drive that is not authorized by IT. He puts the data on that one and then he lost it. So now what are we gonna do? It's unencrypted, right? And
Yeah.
anybody who finds that data, they can do whatever they want to it, right? The other thing is that when you are putting those data in devices that are not properly configured, right? So maybe there is uh, for example, a laptop that is not encrypted or it's just not secure and it was able to compromise it. You can also lose data that way. The most common one these days, the other one is that if you are in the cloud, misconfigured Amazon S3 buckets. All right. So
Yeah.
if you've heard of that, researcher finding 500,000 details of some citizens in some countries, it can happen if you don't have a proper protections in place. Yeah.
So um, you have heard about defend in depth so many
Yeah.
times. So I just want to explain about defense in depth term, and then I just want to focus on zero trust also.
Okay,
So,
that's good.
okay,
All right. So defensive depth is putting multiple layers of protections, right?
yeah,
Other people might know this as the onion approach. I think that's the other term for it, where you can have multiple peel of layers, right? Before you get to the core, you need to go layer one, layer two, and a couple of layers until you penetrate it. And this is very, very important because compromises usually, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? When it happens, how much time you can buy for your company to be able to detect it and respond, right? The more layers you have, the better chances of able to minimize the attack or prevent the attack or even detect or even altogether, right? So it's very important to have multiple fail safe in place. That's why Hamid was alluding to, having XDR, your SIEM, your XOR, all your policies in place are good. And zero trust, there you go. It's a new shiny term these days.
yeah,
Zero trust means not trusting anything. Zero trust is a really good concept. It's very hard to implement, however. It takes multiple phases and culture change, and you get almost everyone needs to be playing into it. But zero trust meaning that you don't you basically have the mentality that it's called breached mentality, where okay, let's pretend that we're breached. How much damage can you take, right? Or how least of the damage can you take? By having zero trust technology, meaning that everything and anything is authenticated, everything and anything is basically inventoried, right? So you know what those threats are, you know what reach they have to, and if a system reach to another system, it needs to be authenticated. It needs to be configured properly, and it is a really good concept. It's a good way to secure a system. However, it's a lot of effort to be able to bake in the whole zero trust. But there are tools and processes out there, and I think hopefully and down the road in the future, we'll be able to implement more zero trust across organizations.
great. Um, so let's say one incident happened in your company. Okay, so there you're part of the incident response team. What is the first step that you're doing for resolving the incident response?
Okay, so for incident response, there are different frameworks out there, but let's just name, for example, one of them for the NIST incident response is preparation. All right, so if you're following that framework, we need to prepare for that specific incident. So what I mean by that is that you prepare the people that are involved in that team. You need to prepare the tools, the the assets that you have on ground, to make sure that they're always ready if an incident happens. And then when an incident happens, the second step will be for detection and analysis, right? So when you're able to detect the threat, you need to be able to understand what it is actually doing. So make sure that when you are in an incident, you need to communicate that properly with your leadership and management team and the appropriate business owners. That's just one of the terms that you're gonna be involved in. Once you do the detection, the second phase and analysis, then you gather your team, you're all good to go, and then you can move into the containment piece, meaning that stop the bleeding, right? So if one of the computers is the one that is been breached, and then now you need to contain that so that able to minimize the damage that it's doing to your company after all the proper authorization, of course. And then you move on to eradication, means that you need to get rid of the threat from your network. You need to kick them out. After you do that, then you'll do the recovery phase. And now you need to bring back the services online because everybody wants a company that is running, not the one that is stopping. Right? So you need to bring back everybody. All the servers needs to be cleaned out at this point. They need to be rebuilt. Everything's been uh, cleaned up. Make sure that the threats are not there anymore, and then the post incident will be the cleanups, documentation. So, very important in an incident, by the way, for everybody, is that anything and everything you do must be documented in a timeline. So, do not just do random things and not put them in document. It's very important because as a post incident activity, usually there will be a lesson learned and study of what happened, how did it happen, and how we can prevent it. And
Mhm.
then as a team and as an organization, you learn from it, and you do that by having the all right information from the moment it happened and the moment it ended. And then you need to have all those information to be able to be better for the next event, or maybe be able to prevent it. So again, let's go over it. You get the preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and then you get the post incident. Okay.
Um, let's talk about some terms that also we talk during our conversation. So here there are some terms like ISO 27001 and SOC 2. What is the difference between these two terms?
Okay, so if you've heard these ones, auditors love them, by the way. So if you work in a company, auditors love these terms. So one of them basically for the ISO 20, uh, this is the one that I always have a hard time. ISO 27001 is basically a framework of saying, okay, what kind of data controls um, you have in place. It's just a framework basically to prove that your information security management system is in place. Okay, so that's for ISO 27001, right? This
Hmm.
is just a framework, right? And proving that their data have a working ISMS, right? For SOC 2, this is now proving that the organization have now implemented those controls in place, right? So this is where you see the internal auditors or maybe even external coming with their Excel sheet saying, have you done this? Yes. Have you done this? Yes. And what they have controls in place, and they need proof that those one are actually working, right? So again, yeah, auditors love them. Remember those ISO 27001 and SOC 2. They love them, but it's essential for companies to be able to have these certifications as well. It's just a proof that you're doing everything right. But then again, the frameworks are just there to guide you, right? So there are other frameworks that are more inclined to an organization. So some companies will have both, some companies will only have one, but it just depends on the business case. Okay.
So let's talk about now about like what are the steps of cyber attacks? Like it starts from we call that one cyber kill chain, right?
Yeah.
So what are those stages?
All right. So there are stages in the cyber kill chain. So before we go the steps, this is when an attack happens, there's usually a beginning and the end, right? This is for this cyber kill chain. This is actually made by Lockheed Martin. So it's one of the defense companies right there. um, the attack would always start with reconnaissance, right? Reconnaissance is when the threat attacker are looking around your fence, right, and then seeing what do you have in place. Okay, do you have ADT security, right? Because you have a sign out there. So that's a good example, or maybe what kind of uh, IDS or firewall you have, or web application firewall you have. That's reconnaissance. They're trying to understand what protections you have in place and what you don't. That's also important. Weaponization is when now they try to be able to get those information and then actually try to put them in a nice package, basically. And then they would now move on to delivery, right? So delivery phase is they need to somehow get that um, nice package for you. And then they need to be able to get that to the recipient, because a an attack tool is only good only if you can actually deliver it to the actual target, right? So you
Yeah.
need to be able to deliver that. So a good example of delivery is emails, right? Still very common these days. Exploitation and be able to take advantage of any underlying systems that you have in place. and then they're able to gain access to it. And then now they would be able to download more tools, which is the installation page. Download more tools and expand throughout their access. But they need to get back into somehow to your system. So now that's going to be the command and control. So they need to maintain persistent access. But the last steps would be the number seven. It's called actions and objectives. So a guy came in, looked around their defenses, reconnaissance. They weaponized their attacks. Now they delivered it, and they exploited your systems. Now they have installed various methods or tools, and then now they're able to gain access. As an attacker, now what? Right? You always have an objective. Every bank robber always have an objective. It's the money, right? Crown jewels of the company. Either that be data, or secrets or trade secrets, or just disruption, right? So that they need to somehow either take that data, or they need to um, take the data out or make some damage for the reputation of the companies. It just depends on the actual goal for the attacker. But yeah, so you get reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and actions and objective. Right. So it's like the seven steps. As a defender, you would employ defense in depth, as we mentioned earlier, to be able to stop these attacks on 1 to 7. Right. There's always opportunities in there.
Okay, so let's talk about some attacks like brute force excesses and skill injection. So let's start with brute force attack and how we can prevent this type of attack.
All right. So brute force attacks. I love these attacks because they're usually plug and play, right? So you would just download a tool, um, you know, get a bunch of logins that you want to do, and then you're able to force your way in, right? First thing is, if you it's a web application, it's good to put in a WAF, right? Web application firewall. That's a good thing. Second thing is make sure that the login the login page for administrators, you can obscure them, but it's only obscured by security, but still helps to minimize the noise. It's always good to have a monitoring process in place. If you have followed these, you're okay. But the best thing is always make sure you have multi-factor authentication. Okay, that's a very most important thing. The other thing is CAPTCHA, right? If you have CAPTCHA, these are the codes that comes in when you log in, proving you're not a robot. I don't know if ChatGPT can solve the CAPTCHA yet, but you can use those. The other thing is making sure that there's limits on how many login attempts a system can make, right? You can configure this in your WAF, or you can configure this on your server. The other thing is privilege accounts should also be monitored as well. But if we put this down on a more simple terms, good passwords, enable MFA, and then make sure that you have a WAF on your web application, right?
Yeah. So how about the excesses attack? What is that one?
Okay, so cross-site scripting, XSS. So for cross-site scripting, this is a really good one because you can execute code if they're not sanitizing it. So a good example is I had a friend who had a website, and he said, "Hey Lewis, can you please able to see if I have some vulnerabilities out there?" So all I did was I put in an XSS payload in the search, and I just click search, and it executes a pop-up dialog for me that says, "Hey, HTML," and then I was able to do that. For you to be able to prevent XSS is to sanitize your inputs, right? To make sure that when somebody's putting their username, it's actually a username or a password, or your ID fields on your URL. Um, it's usually considered as a low risk vulnerability. However, with the proper execution techniques, with the proper chaining, where you can put an XSS to another part of the website, send it to Hamid, who's already logged in, you might be able to steal his login cookie. So again, XSS might come in as a low risk, but if it's chained properly, it can be a high risk as well. So you need to make sure to fix that, right?
So yeah, we have also SQL injection. So what is that term also? How we can prevent that one?
All right. So SQL injection is being able to manipulate data inside the database. So, for example, Hamid a website, let's and he sells tea, right? And then Hamid's database, he sells tea. And as an attacker, I visited his page too in his tea. I see that okay, there's an ID field equals one on the website, or maybe when I order something, now if I be able to manipulate that, I might be able to reach into the database and change values or view values, and then be able to compromise the system. So how can you do this? Same thing. So always sanitize the inputs, always sanitize the queries in your database, and always make sure to follow the best practices. WAF also can help out because WAF can also prevent and detect this kind of attacks. But it's manipulating the database systems.
So we talked about security assessment, and one of them is patch management. Like when you realize that, okay, you have vulnerability, you want to do a patch management for your network. How often do you do patch management?
All right. So in a organization or enterprise perspective, patch management is usually defined in a policy, and you first thing foremost you need to follow that policy. So, but if we're just talking about how often you can patch it, patched often and patch well, right? So when there's a vulnerability that comes out, and then you're able to first thing you need to understand what the patch is doing, make sure you minimize that by doing the patch management throughout a pilot group, right? So you make sure you test that first, and then see if they're able to fix the vulnerability or any impacts on the actual network or performance. And when you're able to do that, you need to apply it to the more targeted servers, and then you can do production. However, in some instances, a production patch might be needed if it's one of those really risky vulnerabilities that are unauthenticated, or they don't need they're very easy to exploit. But you should patch often, and you should always patch the vulnerability according to the criticality and according to the impact, but you should patch it as soon as possible. Yeah.
So during security assessment, usually we do a port scanning. Can you name some of the software or what does that mean, port scanning?
All right, port scanning, it's same thing when you're trying to see what doors are open and what kind of doors are they. So port scanning, you can target a lot of ports, any of the 65,000 ports that you have. Each port sometimes would designate to a service. Most of the time it is correct, but sometimes it might be a custom service. But when somebody port scan, they're trying, okay, is SSH open? Is port 80 open, right? Is port 21 open? And with this port scan, they'll also be able to fingerprint the service behind it. Maybe there's a specific vendor for that SSH or for that FTP client. The tools that are used for these, there's different ones. You can have Nmap, right?
Yeah,
Tenable Nessus Scanner if you're an enterprise. There's our other tools out there as well. But you're just looking for open or closed doors, and what kind of doors are they or ports are they, right? So,
yeah. So also, that's my maybe last question. So that's what's the difference between encryption and hash?
all right, that's a good
Yeah,
question. So this question actually comes up a lot of the interviews. So encryption is taking a data and protecting it, but being able to bring back that data to that unencrypted form. So the encryption can take a data, make it secure, and then you can bring it back to original form. As for hashing, you're taking a file, right? And then you're creating a unique uh, fingerprint on it, but you won't be able to take the hash to bring back the actual file, right? So that's
yeah.
that's that's actually the
It's a
difference.
one-way function actually. So you
Exactly. So
cannot return to the back, right?
exactly.
So one of the things also we have under hash is that hash, it has a unique length. Like whatever you put inside the input, it doesn't really matter. It can be one character, it can be 100 character, but the output, it has a fixed length.
Correct.
Like It's about the block that you're hashing, like 6428. The thing is that hashing is completely different from the encryption, as you mentioned. Some people, but we are using hashing for integrity. Can you name some of the hashing algorithm?
Yeah, so we get the MD5,
Yeah.
we got SHA-1, SHA-256. MD5 is, by the way, MD5 is a weak hashing, so don't use that because there are some attacks that you can do to produce the same MD5 that's been broken for years now. Right now, it's good hashing is SHA-256 or even the 512 one. But those are the quite example of hashing.
Then what is also salted hashes? What is that one?
All right, so because when you produce a hash, sometimes some of the weaker hash you may be able to, if I hash Hamid's name and it equals to, for example, a secure string, let's just make up one called banana, right? So every time I put Hamid's name in lowercase equals banana, it I might be able to generate maybe top 10,000 names and somehow guess what that hashing is, right? So may banana means like Hamid, right? So now I know that every time I generate Hamid or I see that banana as a hash, I know it's close to Hamid. Now, to be able to prevent those kind of cracking attacks, this is important because when somebody dumps a database and then they're using a known hashing that is weak, they may be able to produce the equivalent of those hashed passwords.
Hmm.
Now, with salted hashing, you're adding a randomized key in front of the data, and then it produces a more unique hash at the end or secure hash. So now when I put Hamid and then I put if you put another salt, maybe Hamid and then potato, and then I hashed it, it might become like, as different. It might be now not a banana anymore. Maybe it says grapes or something else. So as far as the attacker is concerned, it basically makes it hard for them to be able to just generate a or crack the hashes basically.
All right, perfect. And maybe that's final question. So it just came on my mind that about capturing traffic. So let's say we want to find troubleshoot some issues in the network, and we realize at the final solution, okay, we should capture the traffic. How do you capture traffic? Um, like, what are the name of the tools that you're using, and uh, these tools, what features give you?
All right. So for Linux boxes, you should be able to use TCP dump.
Hmm.
Usually they're built into these Linux appliances. For Windows computers or any other workstation that you have access to, you can also use Wireshark, right? So that's one thing. You can also use. There's some also PCAP tools out there able to capture. Wireshark is good because it gives you that GUI and there's some more options to be able to select from. That is if you're on the host. But if you want to capture some traffic for the organization, you can also use it on your firewall or your switch. You'll be able to have port mirroring or span, right? And
Yeah.
then you can put an appliance to gather that. But then again, that's more data. So if you're only targeting like Hamid, maybe his browsing is not working. You'll be able to use maybe Wireshark and see what's going on in there on his host workstation. But if you're capturing traffic, let's say maybe for a malware that is across the system and you don't know where it is, or you're tracking down, maybe you can capture that from a firewall perspective.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much, Luis, for being with us. Also, we have a second part for this recording. Luis, you promised me we're gonna be have a more hands-on in the second part.
Yeah.
So we're gonna record that one later. Thank you so much for being us
All
and
right.
have a good
Thank
one.
you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.